Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. I'm Morgan McClintock, the CEO of startup marketing agency Firebrand. We've launched this podcast to interview the best in the business, but I'm not going to do it alone. So please meet my co-hosts.
I'm Nicole Pytel, Firebrand's VP of Content Marketing.
And I'm Chris Ulbrich, Firebrand's Head of Media Relations.
I'm Ian Lipner, a tech PR and crisis communications veteran.
We'll drop a new episode each week, so there's plenty of fuel for your marketing fire. Get the spark you need to take your startup to a whole new level. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you all. Joined today by Chris Ulbrich. Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Doing great. Great to be here.
We're going to talk about the burning questions in PR that we have been asked recently. But before we get into that, happy Independence Day to you, Chris.
Well, thanks very much. You're going to go see some fireworks?
Yeah, it's July the 4th. I've always felt this one is a bit odd for Brit, congratulating people on Independence Day. I've always felt awkward. But now I'm a citizen, so...
And congratulations on that.
Oh, yeah.
I could imagine before that we would have sort of mixed feelings about the holiday, and fair enough.
Yeah, you're right. It's always been a little bit bittersweet, but now I'm all about the fireworks. We've just had our Startup Marketer Outlook come out last week. Lots of great feedback. The report is looking really good. So if you haven't had your copy, please go to firebrand.marketing. There's a link on the homepage. You can also find it in the resources. Grab yours. 250 startup marketers we surveyed and asked them all about their targets and their resources and what their initiatives they had, the challenges. So great way to sort of benchmark yourself against early and late stage startups. Firebrand.marketing for that. But now we're going to talk about some of the burning questions for PR that we've seen lately. And just to sort of kick this one off, Chris, here's one. My CEO got an email from a magazine wanting to do a cover story. Is this a scam? What do we think?
Short answer, yes. One thing you learn in PR, anything's possible. But 99.5% of the time, you get an incoming email from a publication you don't recognize, and it is offering an interview with your CEO and a guaranteed story with your CEO. That is essentially a scam. Bonus points if it comes from an organization in Florida, triple bonus points if it's associated with some C-list celebrity who was big in 1980s television and is now mostly seen on late night infomercials.
It's Ted Danson.
Right. Exactly. Scam is maybe too strong a word. What these offers are essentially paid opportunities where you pay generally in the tens of thousands of dollars for a guaranteed interview. And some publications, if it's a print publication, they'll offer a quote unquote cover story or some other kind of feature. You'll often be approached by television production companies, again, mostly based in Florida for some reason, which want to ostensibly interview your CEO, for a segment that will air on, and then they will share with you a list of something like 40 cable and network outlets. And it all looks very impressive, but what you don't realize is that what you're basically doing is buying time on an infomercial, which will air late at night on affiliates somewhere in the country. So is it a scam? Well, not exactly. You will be on television somewhere. Are you likely to reach your target audience? No. Is it conceivable you would want to do this just to have, say, a professionally produced video segment that you could use for your own marketing? Maybe. In my entire career, it's never made sense for any of our clients to pursue this. We generally advise clients not to, because, our sense is if an organization is reaching out to you in a way that is even halfway deceptive, and they're trying to convince you that you're getting more than you're getting and that they're more respectable than they are, that's not a good place to start a relationship where you'd be spending tens of thousands of dollars. So we get these questions all the time from our clients because they get hit up by these companies. They say, is this for real? And we always just say no. It's not worth getting into the details, but basically the answer is no.
And they look very legitimate. If you go to the website, Enterprise World or something, it looks pretty good. You can see other cover stories with other CEOs at companies you probably heard of. Or if you go to the website of the broadcast outlets, there's Ted or whoever it is, right, seeming to endorse. I don't even know if they're tied into this. It passes the sniff test. And even if the price looks affordable, you probably, as you get into it, realize that there are other production costs and distribution costs that you weren't initially aware of. So skip this one. There are other things that if you wanted to do a paid sponsored segment on or sponsor an article in, there are other legitimate options there that we would pursue first before something that sort of blows in off the street and promises a cover story. This is not a thing. Second question. What's the difference between marketing messaging and press messaging?
That is a deep and fundamental question. Well, what I'll often say when we're discussing this with clients is that marketing messaging is about what you think people should be doing, and news messaging is about what people are doing. People, companies. Messaging is about the world as you'd like to convince people it is. News is about the world as evidence shows it is. Another way of looking at that is marketing messaging is about a future that hasn't arrived yet, or it's an encouragement about what people ought to do. And news is about what is demonstrably happening in the world. It might seem like a subtle distinction, but it's actually a really fundamental distinction because marketing people who are very, very good at their job go about their entire day and they build entire careers, getting really good at convincing people to see the world as they see it and to take action that they haven't taken yet. So when they come to PR, it is understandable that they're going to think about story from the standpoint that they take every day when they're crafting messages designed for people who might buy the product. However, that's not really the mindset that a reporter comes to a story with, for the most part. For the most part, a reporter is looking to cover phenomena in the world that can be shown to exist, that there is evidence that they exist. The classic journalism school news story is fire down the street. Now, it would be wrong to say that news would never cover a story about a building that was likely to catch on fire. Or it is possible that a news organization might adopt as a cause, might do some kind of campaign about how this old hotel is a fire trap and the government ought to do something about it. That sort of shades into editorial, but it's not unknown for a news organization to do it. But what day in, day out a news organization is doing is covering fires that actually happened somewhere in the city. That's the core of news reporting. So if you want to get the attention of news reporters, it's not impossible you can get them with a sort of speculative pitch about what the world might look like. But you're much more likely to have success if you can craft a story that is demonstrably about what is happening in the world. And so we often describe this as the difference between a company's should message and a company's are message. Most of marketing is companies should do X, Y, and Z. Most of news is companies are doing X, Y, and Z, which is new, which is different from what they were doing before. Another classic formulation about news is that news is new. There is some overlap there between marketing and PR, but a story about a fire that happened in the past is history. It's not news, right? It was significant. It's important to remember, but it doesn't fit the rubric of news. So news is something that's significant, that has demonstrably happened right now, or just recently. The more you can align your thinking as a marketer with that when it comes to your media program, which I know is not the easiest thing to do when 85-90% of the rest of your job is oriented in a different direction. But if you can do that, you will be a lot more successful with your PR.
I think another way of framing this is to think about the audience. Marketing messages are mainly towards stakeholders like your prospects, the people who are going to buy your product or service, and convincing them why they should buy that product or service. Whereas the journalists are not buying your product. They're not in the market for that. They're not going to use it. They're trying to come up with a story. They're buying a story. So your media message and your marketing message are going to be different. You have to sell them, if you like, reporters, a story. And it can't just be, well, here are all the features of my product, because that's not something that, as Chris just said, is new and has just happened. Those are just benefits. Mm-hmm. And so thinking through the lens of, okay, if you just give reporters, here's, the same marketing messages that you're giving out everywhere else, they can't really use that because they're not buying the product.
That's a really good point. It's especially relevant to the kinds of media that clients want most. Everybody wants to be in mainstream media. They want to be in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the handful of elite publications that set the media agenda. But by definition, in order to be in those publications, you have to have a message that appeals to hundreds of thousands of people who not only would never buy your product, but would never even be in a position to buy your product. So one of the great challenges of PR is making yourself relevant to audiences that would not normally think they have any interest in what you do. And that's a very different audience from the one marketers tend to appeal to in all their other channels. It's what makes PR a really distinctive challenge.
Right. And so, for example, and we're launching our product here. We hear all the features and the benefits. Those are your marketing messages. But we're launching our product here. And if it's successful, this is going to disrupt these major organizations who your readers are invested in, that they bought their shares or they work at that company and they've heard of them. That then bridges it up to something with much broader appeal. And the reporter is covering the potential impact for their readers on these major organizations. That's what they care about. They don't care about the features of the product. They care about the impact that it might have. And that maybe illustrates the difference between these two.
That's right.
Next question. We often get this one. We're having a user conference. We're going to have customers there. We're going to have our CEO speak. We're going to be talking about new products. It's a big marketing effort for us. Can we get some press there? Because that would be really great.
This is an evolving area for PR advice, because the answer on one side of the pandemic looked like one thing. During the pandemic, obviously, it looked different. And I think we're all still trying to figure out what that advice looks like post-pandemic, because it's in most parts of the country, it's been a couple of years since conferences came back. So we're kind of back to normal, but work habits are not what they were pre-pandemic. A lot of the time when we would think about what was possible for a client that was holding an event in a certain place at a certain time of year, we would actually think about the proximity of the event venue to the headquarters of the local news bureaus, because we knew that, reporters the reporters that we were interested in having come down would be pretty dependably there if they were in town at all. Now, especially when you're dealing with, say, the tech trades, everybody's working from home. And a lot of cases, the state of journalism being what it is, reporters increasingly don't live in urban centers, which is where events happen. Reporters for the largest national papers, like the New York Times reporters, still generally live in New York or their affiliate bureaus in Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco. But if you're talking about InfoWorld, you don't really think about InfoWorld headquarters the way that you did when I got started in the business. When I got started in in 2008 or so, there was still a circuit in Boston that you would make with your enterprise tech clients. You'd start in Boston and sort of make this loop that hit all the major analyst houses. And along the way, you could tag various tech journalists at either their home office, which would be near Boston, or in like a Starbucks nearby or something like that. Journalists are now much more geographically scattered than they were. In general, people have gotten out of the habit of being in person. I mean, look at us. Each of us is working from home. Journalists are much the same way. So the lead editors might be in the office, but I think they long ago got out of the habit of, in the business we used to call desk side briefings, where you would drop in on a reporter at their place. It's not unheard of anymore, but it's almost a joke among reporters of a certain age about how they used to do these so-called desk sides. They still get once in a while offers for a desk side briefing, and they'll say, what? Like, what? A desk side briefing? What's that? I haven't heard those words in a decade. So coming back to events, if all the stars align, sure, it is possible. In order to make this work, you're going to be approaching a relatively small set of enterprise reporters. So let's just talk about enterprise tech for, argument's sake. A small set of enterprise tech reporters that sort of straddles the line between influencer, reporter, and analyst. Where a New York Times reporter almost certainly would not accept airfare or lodging to come out. They are open to coming out to your event if you pay their way. And they will have varying sort of degrees of independence. Some of them are effectively willing to provide content for your event. So they're kind of doing it like a freelance content production job. A lot of Forbes contributors fall into this category. Others take a more traditional journalistic line where they'll accept travel expense, but they will insist on total independence and, just fair enough as long as you know going in. Probably the most reliable way to get content producers on site, and perhaps the best way to get someone who really takes a deep interest in your business, is to work with someone who is straight up describes themselves as an analyst, because those arrangements are straightforward, uncomplicated, on the table. A lot of times you find enterprise tech analysts who have left one of the major houses like Gartner or IDC or Forrester, and they've gone solo, and they have a price sheet of what they charge to make an appearance at your booth, to host a conversation with you at your conference, to produce a couple pieces of analysis about your conference and that you could post on your blog, for instance. So there are a lot of contingencies. It's not impossible. It's much less common than it used to be. And probably if you're asking this question, you are not at a level of prominence that a reporter is sort of naturally going to be attracted to come without being the sort that would take room and board. Like if you're AWS, people are coming to your event. They'll pay their own way. I'm not an AWS PR. I assume they pay their own way. But given the number of reporters who cover those events, that looks like a more traditional sort of media scrum. Whereas with smaller tech events, these days, if you see coverage, it's usually from one or two analysts that the marketing team has enlisted, usually with some kind of like stipend or compensation to make the appearance. So just know that going in. It certainly doesn't hurt if all the stars align and you happen to be holding an event in the neighborhood of a journalist who, like freelancers are often good ones to approach for this sort of thing because they need to prospect for stories and they aren't on the same treadmill that a staff writer might be. So if you do find a reporter who can drop in, it may be more likely to be like a freelancer who lives in the area. But by and large, you're going to probably, if time is of the essence, your motion will be most efficient if you focus on analysts and the in-between analyst reporter types.
I think that's great advice. And just sort of think of it through the lens of a reporter has to write several stories, right? They have to publish. And if they spend the whole day, logistics aside, at your event, are they going to get the stories that's going to drive the impressions? Is your company of prominence that they're going to get different stories from that's worth the investment? And for a lot of earlier stage companies, the answer is, well, probably not. And maybe if it's a virtual event, you can carve off some separate time to they can talk to this customer or they can talk to the CEO around the product. Like you can do other PR around the same time as the event. As Chris says, it's less likely that they're going to attend. There are, though, just on the media side, like as you get bigger, you could do the Cube and SiliconANGLE. John Furrier does a great job with the Cube. And I think they've sort of carved out a little niche of building out a studio and interviewing your senior execs and customers at the event. It gives some razzmatazz. You're up there as a bigger event at that point. But that is another great product, basically, as an option. But I think you're looking at, I don't know, latest price is 50,000 plus. So that obviously means you need a certain size of event to warrant that. But that's a great option. All right, next question. Which is the best newswire to use?
The flip answer is the one you're using. The big distinction between newswires is full service and DIY. So a full service newswire has 24/7 support. They can take your copy and, if necessary, put it on the wire within probably an hour. The DIY sites often require a lead time of at least 24 hours. DIY is one where you do the formatting yourself. They provide a sort of self-service interface to basically set up the release that then their automated system can execute on. So basically, where a full-service wire has a team of editors working 24/7, there to serve you and take your edits and whatnot. The DIY wires have you play that role. And I can't say that I have investigated every single DIY wire out there, but the ones that I've seen, for whatever reason, tend to impose a delay between having your content locked and the time they can actually issue the release. So if you are working on your release until the last minute, DIY is just not going to be a good solution for you. And for that reason, while the savings for DIY are considerable, you can capture a lot of those same savings by a judicious selection of the newswire distribution on a full service wire. Those familiar with the way, if you've ever put out a release on a wire, you know that the wire services offer a range of options for distributing your press release. They range from a full national distribution, a sort of a scattershot national distribution, to highly targeted specialty distributions for industries like healthcare and technology. And ironically, the more targeted distribution, it costs more than the scattershot one. Like you might think, well, if I can go wide nationally, why wouldn't I do that? You actually pay more for targeting. I personally think that the value of higher cost distributions is highly questionable. And you will probably get 95 to 99.5% of the value of your distribution with the lowest cost that makes any kind of reasonable sense for you. Another way that you can reduce the cost of a regular newswire is by purchasing a package of multiple releases. If you know you're going to be doing 3 or 5 releases in a year, you can get a discount on all of them. And, agencies like Firebrand will strike agreements with certain wires, certain preferred providers that will, in exchange for being that agency's preferred provider, they will provide that agency's clients with a significant discount. In general, we tend to recommend the full service wire for our clients just because we're often working with clients who have a lot of stakeholders feeding in to their announcements. And it is not at all unusual to have last minute changes, even changes that come in, late at night after the release has been queued for the following morning. And that is a lot more difficult to manage with a DIY wire from what I've seen than with a full service wire. And so, in general, unless you are doing like one press release a year and you are confident that you will have plenty of lead up time and there aren't going to be any last minute changes, I think the full service wire makes sense in most cases.
Yeah, we have a deal with Globe Newswire and they give us a discount and that tends to be the one we recommend. But if a client comes with Business Wire, we're not going to say, hey, you must move off that and onto ours. Like, I think they're all different flavors of vanilla. So just use the one you've got, as you say. And also get a package. You don't have to put everything over the wire. You're not getting any media coverage, editorial media coverage from this thing. It's basically an email to a bunch of inboxes. So this isn't a thing that you should worry too much about. Try and make it as effective as possible. But definitely put the important milestone funding, those kind of things, announcement on the wire as a statement of record. That's good. But PR Newswire, Business Wire, Globe Newswire.
That's a really important point. I've used all the major full-service newswires, and I do not think there is much to distinguish them. They all offer roughly the same interface experience, roughly the same newsroom experience. Some would argue that their distributions are more effective than others. But as you say, I would struggle to think of a single media hit of any significance that any of my clients have received over all the years I've been doing this that came directly from a newswire distribution as opposed to email outreach. It's, as you say, having a sort of a statement of record for important news is good. It can also be useful to have a sort of organized, if you don't have a CMS that can really easily organize graphics and text and put them all together neatly. If you don't have a place for that on your website, then a newswire can do that for you. But all the newswires, they cost about the same. They provide about the same service. There's not a lot to distinguish them. So if your agency has a relationship with one, you're probably going to be perfectly happy using that one and saving some money.
Next question is, how do I set the budget for my PR program? And maybe I can start with this one because we get this a fair bit, particularly when companies are looking at, okay, I'm going to appoint an agency. I've spoken to some, we have a funding announcement. Okay, but I'm an A-round company. I've heard that Valley agencies start at $15,000 a month, $20,000 a month. That sounds like a lot for the stage of company that we're at. I really only have this announcement. Maybe we have some other stuff. how do I even think about this? And so, agencies do get a pretty bad rap for being on that high level retainer, and they're just not suitable for a lot of startups. So the way I like to think about it is it's an investment, number one. You're building your brand over time, building a reputation with reporters and then all of your other stakeholders. So number one, think about it like that. Number two, don't overinvest in this. It feels uncomfortable, right? The budget is so high. Let's just say it's $20,000 a month, which is a lot of money for early stage companies, that you need it to deliver an outside amount of coverage from whatever you do. There's a lot of pressure internally, a lot of expectation. And honestly, there's just not enough for an agency to do to sustain it, because maybe this is the first time the company has started engaged with an agency. They don't have a roster of spokespeople. They haven't really built up press relations. They don't know the issues that they're going to talk about. Like, the engine isn't there to support that kind of infrastructure. And so the agency won't have enough to really sort of sink its teeth into. And then you may look after 90 days, 180 days and go, okay, well, we invested all this money. And what did we get? We've spent $120,000 over the last 6 months on this. And really, we've been sort of standing up the program. So maybe ramping it up. There are certainly plenty of startups out there who are spending way more than that, twice that, because they've built their engine up to that size, and they have a number of different programs going. They've expanded it internationally, etc. So absolutely, you're buying the time of a team of people here, and you can use it. But I would build up to a bigger program, because you'll have proven the value and you'll have felt the impact. But equally, there's a level where you're not going to generate enough coverage to make a difference, right? One or two pieces of coverage, it's not going to be seen by your audience. It's not going to sustain and change the reputation of the business. And so you might be better off investing that money elsewhere. Maybe you can pay media or something, or just have a freelance person help you whilst you sort of scale up to an agency kind of investment. But I would say certainly get it so that it feels comfortable, and start on the smaller side and ramp up, because then you're sort of building on a solid foundation for the business.
Yeah. Comical might not be the right word, but it is funny how often we find ourselves, it's not all the time, but more often than you would expect. You and I, Morgan, we find ourselves in meetings trying to convince startups that they need to spend less on PR, which is a very odd place for an agency to be in. But it's often the right advice when you're at seed stage or A stage. And, if a marketer comes in and they've been working at a later stage company and they're used to the budgets that they were paying at an agency at that company, think, PR costs $15,000, $20,000 a month, and I'm ready for it. And I've secured that with my CEO. And, they reluctantly agreed to it. And here we come and we say, that is probably not the right mix for you at this stage. More than once we've had clients or potential clients try to actually convince us to take more money. You're exactly right that, especially now, with the media sort of evolving the way it has, where PR and marketing are working more hand in hand, media teams and marketing teams are working more hand in hand, and their operations are becoming more integrated. I'm a media relations person, but I would be the first to say that media relations is not the answer to every marketing problem. And so if you have $15,000 to spend as an early stage company, it may very well make sense to distribute that among a mix of PR and other sort of marketing activities.
Yeah, allocate it to more content, more gated assets, get the email nurture, like other areas where you're going to get more ROI from it in a shorter period of time. You should do that. And you can always focus it around a funding announcement. Sure, you got a bigger news, but a lot of startups don't have a lot of news or a lot of other assets, mediagenic assets to go after initially. Certainly initially, you're a single product line. We've got 2 or 3 customers. There's not enough, we've got some opinions. There's not enough to sustain a big program. And maybe there's only a handful of reporters who are focused on this area. Great. Get what you can get, do that, and certainly build the profile and, go for the, if we can reach up into a broader publications, we should be looking at that. But, keep it moderate and then invest later on.
Right. And this actually gets back to what we were discussing earlier about the difference between marketing and media messages, where, the media message is more about what is demonstrably happening. And when you're a new company, often in an emerging sector, you have yet to establish that things are happening, that companies are adopting this new technique that you're espousing, that you're part of a new wave of solutions that the world ought to take note of. You need to kind of lay the groundwork, establishing the proof points for the story you want to tell later. And a lot of times that looks like an investment in content, customer stories, case studies to substantiate the story you want to tell. Otherwise, you're basically going out to reporters hat in hand saying, trust me, there's something important going on here. And unless you're a CEO who is famous for having done it before, and the story is famous CEO is out to do it again, reporters aren't usually going to take a chance on an unproven entity or an executive they don't know. So you're often better served trying to establish those proof points through owned assets, development of owned assets, before really making a decided push on the media front.
Last question here. How do I assess the newsworthiness of my new product?
The way I would approach that is to say, if you're asking about the newsworthiness of your product and it's not a commercial product designed for, mass market, you're probably asking the wrong question already. To sort of go back to our discussion about how media is going to approach any story, it's sort of like the infamous chart in Dead Poets Society about how to establish the greatness of an author. But bear with me. If you imagine a 2-axis chart and you have novelty on the x-axis and significance on the y-axis, I think you have some sense for how to rate the newsworthiness of a piece of news. The novelty is easy to chart, right? Your novelty is going to be, it will be new in the sense that it hasn't been announced before, as long as it hasn't been announced before. And you'd be surprised how often we're tasked with announcing something that has already been out in the world. And that is in and of itself, you're starting behind the 8 ball if you're doing that. But generally speaking, if you're announcing it, it's new. But then the other part of novelty is how different is it from similar things that have come before. If it's the third product of its type, then the novelty will be considerably, the novelty value will be considerably less if it's a Me Too. But those are relatively easy calculations to make alongside the other one, which is significance. Significance is where, as a PR pro, you spend most of your energy, because especially if you're trying to ladder up with your story beyond to trade press, that, as we discussed earlier, the challenge you have is to make the case that whatever you're announcing is worth a reporter's attention, even if their audience is composed of people who have no day-to-day interest in the product you're launching or the company that it comes from. I mean, just think about how many hundreds of thousands of new whatevers are popping up across America every single day. There are new faucet fittings and innovations in cardboard and cocktail skewers, and, novelty in and of itself can only take you so far. At some point, what you are pitching has to be interesting to a significant enough percentage of the reporter's audience that they can justify focusing on the story. So what you have to really figure out is what sort of bank shot you can hit off of the plain significance of your news. Usually you can't just pitch a B2B product to the New York Times. What you are probably going to do, your best case scenario is going to be to represent your product as an example of, as a class of product that speaks to a larger development in, say, how the workforce is functioning. So the New York Times is never going to cover the launch of a legal search product. But famously, for those of us in the business and who have represented legal search products, they have covered the effect on lawyers themselves of increased automation of legal functions, the effect of AI and automation on lower level attorneys' jobs, and what impact that could have on, say, the economics of law firms, or the prospects of lawyers who aren't working at elite firms, the large number of attorneys who make money on the side or even full time doing fairly menial tasks. Now that is a high level story. Your company could absolutely be mentioned in that story. It's not even inconceivable that story could coincide roughly with the launch of your product, but it's not going to be about your product. And that's the key distinction to make. So when assessing the newsworthiness of your story, there's no one answer to that question, because the answer will depend on how successful you are at finding the greatest level of significance within the story that you're launching. And all I can tell you is that it is probably not the way to make your story the most significant to the widest audience is probably not a brute force approach.
I think that's an excellent framing, and it sheds light on the sort of dichotomy here, because if you're a marketer with a product launch, okay, there's a lot of marketing activities around the product messaging and the launch, and there's an email to people and the pricing. Like, there's a lot of work there, and you are excited about this. This is an exciting, significant thing for our company. But from a PR perspective, is this an exciting thing for the readers of this publication? And those things might be different. And to be the voice that sort of says, yes, I'm excited about this. It's a big milestone for us. For the rest of the world, we have to make it clear why it's exciting for them. And, let's just put this into context. Other companies have done this. It's an upgrade on our prior product. It's still a very big breakthrough. But, let's just frame it within some context. You have to hold those two thoughts in your mind, that you're excited about it, but maybe not everybody else is yet. And so, to Chris's point, if you want to get in the New York Times is read by a lot of financiers and a lot of lawyers. If robots are taking the lawyer's job and your product helps to do that, the New York Times is interested in it, right? So you've made that connection, but they're not inherently interested in a new legal hold product. Or in e-discovery, because e-discovery isn't the thing that they wake up every day worrying about. So I do think that sort of significance and having that context is a great way to sort of think about it. And sometimes that means in those meetings, we are, or your PR agency or your PR representation is the person kind of going, okay, make this significant for me. Give me the data that's going to make this significant for other people. And it's not that I'm not personally committed to it and I'm not personally excited about it, but we need to convince others. And that's the problem to focus on. And, it's not that we're pouring cold water on this thing, but that's the problem to solve. And if you want your product to be newsworthy, you have to make it significant for the audience of the publications that you're going after. All right, Chris, this has been a great discussion, and I really like addressing some of these burning questions. They come up a lot. Thank you for all of your advice there. Really appreciate it. And just as we wrap up here, Happy July 4th to you all. And if you haven't, just as a reminder, grab your copy of the Startup Marketers Outlook, firebrand.marketing, and we will see you all again next time. So thank you, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
See you. Well, that wraps it up for today. But two quick things before we go. First, we've just published our Startup Marketer Outlook, which is a report based on a survey of over 250 senior marketers, early and late stage startups, all about their plans for H2 2024. So please go to firebrand.marketing, and in the resources section, you'll be able to download your copy there. Second, if you've enjoyed the show, please give us a rating or a review. Obviously, subscribe. We really appreciate that, since that helps others discover the show. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, get out there and crush your marketing goals.